Riverpaw couldn't bear it. Turning, she fled to the tunnel, all the while choking on the lump in her throat. It's not her. It's not her, she chanted to herself. But the image of Shard, no, Windspeaker, sitting in the den could not be wiped from her mind. Before she made it to the tunnel, she slammed blindly into an elderly she-cat, and the two tumbled into the sand. "Hey!" the elder cried indignantly. Riverpaw untangled herself and raced away once again. She heard Ashheart behind her, apologizing briefly to the she-cat before following his apprentice as she scrambled through the tunnel. "Riverpaw, wait!" he ordered. She ignored him. Her mother's voice was too loud in her mind. When she emerged, pushing past the brush, the brisk wind caught her pelt and she gasped, breathing in the cool, moist air. Vilcus was still sitting, waiting, but he only gave her a quizzical look. The she-cat ignored him. Without realizing, tears had begun to stream down her face, and she sobbed quietly. "It's not her," Riverpaw tried to convince herself. Droplets dotted the rocky floor by her paws. The bush's leaves rustled and Ashheart emerged. She heard his quiet paw steps approach, and with a wave of embarrassment, she tried to wipe away her tears with a paw. "Riverpaw, you can't just..." His tone quickly softened when he saw her wet cheeks. "What happened?" Riverpaw sniffed and exhaled, trying to get a hold of herself. "Sorry, it's nothing," she stammered, making her voice as even as possible. "Please go away, Ashheart." "Riverpaw, tears aren't nothing. I'm your mentor. You can tell me what's wrong." The gray-speckled warrior pressed his pelt to his apprentices comfortingly. Riverpaw remained silent. This shouldn't be a big deal, she thought to herself sternly, frustrated. Why am I crying? She only looked like Mom. When Riverpaw didn't reply, Ashheart continued softly. "It's all right. Truth for truth, right? We say what we mean." And without even realizing why, Riverpaw's mouth opened and words gushed forth. "It's my fault, Ashheart. Mom died in the city. She died, and it's all my fault. I know she'd say otherwise, but it's true. I have strength. I know I do. If I'd only been able to just... And it happened twice. Twice I couldn't protect her, Ash. I couldn't do anything. I kept making terrible choices, and how could she possibly forgive me for that? How could she not be incredibly angry with me? After everything I've done." Riverpaw gritted her teeth and lowered her head, unable to say another word. If I'd protected her, it could have really been her sitting in that den, alive. Maybe then Cloud would look at me. Ashheart let the brown she-cat cry for a moment. "So then, did Windspeaker look like your mother?" he asked in a murmur. Riverpaw nodded and choked. "Exactly like her." "It's not her, though. You know that." Of course I know. It just bothered me." The two were silent. A chill breeze swept past, howling faintly between the ridges. Riverpaw smelled rain. She gasped in anger. I thought I'd gotten past this moons ago with Echo and Stone." Her voice cracked and layered with frustration. "I didn't think it would still hurt this much." She choked and squeezed her eyes together tightly. Another wave of emotion washed through her, and she bent under the force of it. Without her permission, her mouth whispered, I can't picture her face clearly anymore." There was a moment of quiet, then Ashheart's calm voice. "Riverpaw, your mother forgives you." Riverpaw hesitated. She sniffed. "I know that. Do you? Really? Listen, Riverpaw. Ashhart lowered his head until his gaze was even with hers. My father died fighting at Badger when I was a young apprentice. I was there when he passed. He couldn't say a word. Blood covered his sliced throat. But he looked at me, and in his eyes, I knew what he was thinking. The warrior's amber eyes shone with the memory. He was thinking that he was proud of me, and he was so happy to have lived, and to have loved my mother. He apologized to me, even though I was there, and I was helpless to save him. He apologized for dying too soon. After that, I kept thinking about every scenario where I saved him. I thought, if I'd gotten there even 1 second faster, he'd be alive. But the truth was, I didn't save him. I didn't get there fast enough. I didn't recover quickly and push him out of the way. That was the reality. It took me seasons to accept that, and to accept that it wasn't anyone's fault. It wasn't even the Badger's fault. It's just the way things happened. And my father knew that too. I could see it in his eyes, even though I didn't recognize it before. Riverpaw looked away, unable to reply. Ashhart paused for a moment before murmuring, I can't see his face anymore, but I'll always remember his eyes and his message. Your mother doesn't blame you, because she knew as well. How are you sure? The brown apprentice whispered. What were her last words? To leave. Go before more soldiers came. I had friends to think about. She said, and she told me she loved me. You see, she didn't blame you for anything, Riverpaw. She was just so glad that she could protect you. Riverpaw closed her eyes, taking a breath. She called the image of her mother's eyes as she died. What messages had been hiding there? It wasn't hard to travel back to that moment. As the soft, green gaze appeared, Riverpaw saw in their depths the message. I am so happy for you. I am so happy you found a family, found someone to protect. I am more than content with the life I lived, no matter how it ended. I had some amazing moments with you, Cloud, Dusk, and Emerald, and with your father as well. My last wish for you? Riverpaw opened her eyes, and her mother's green gaze, along with the message within them, faded. But Riverpaw whispered the last piece to herself. My last wish was that you lead an amazing life with the ones you care about most. Ashhart remained at her side while she steadied herself. A strange resolve began to seep into the she-cat. Her mother's death had sat like a black hole in her stomach for so long. The hole hadn't closed, but it no longer drained her like before. It was strange how long she had sat with it, ever since the city. Yet only now did it feel like it had fully become a part of her. Riverpaw took another deep breath. She knew that she had to do. If she wanted to stop the guilt and shame that had built up inside her, she couldn't hesitate anymore. Ready? Ashhart meowed. Riverpaw nodded, wiping a paw over her face one last time. The Tom led her back inside where they met Lily and Windspeaker. The healer's appearance still caused a stab of sadness, but the apprentice swallowed the feeling. Now that Riverpaw saw Windspeaker more clearly, she noticed the slight differences. Windspeaker's ears were tipped with tufts of fur, and her eyes were sharper, more intense. Her stature was different as well, much more rigid than Shard's. Riverpaw focused on these things, trying to see the other cat, the healer. Lily looked at the two with slight irritation. Where did you go? I was just telling Windspeaker about how supportive the clans have been in our struggle with the wolves. She flicked her ear pointedly, and Ashhart smiled at the healer. I apologize for rushing off earlier. It was a personal matter. The healer eyed the Tom but didn't pry. She turned her gaze on Riverpaw. I cannot ask for details, but I would ask for an apology on behalf of Song That Sounds from Rivers, the elderly she-cat you ran into. The healer shifted, revealing the gray-brown tabby elder seated behind a sprawling tree root. Her eyes were a blue-green, and she looked at Riverpaw expectantly. The apprentice dipped her head. I'm sorry. I was startled, and I didn't mean to knock into you. Song flicked her ears. Apology accepted. Be sure to keep an eye open in the future. She patted away, and Windspeaker stood. Now, I would very much like to meet this wolf of yours. The season tree cats eventually agreed to their plan, but it took Lily, Ashhart, and Riverpaw a long time to convince them. They explained the situation as well as Kite's history with the pack. Vilkas sat still and quiet, only moving to push the sheep toward the healer as his offering. When Windspeaker accepted, Lily bowed low with gratitude, and the healer declared that the border would be open for the chosen cats to fight Hisoka. Her only condition was for some of her own cats to be included in the mission and be involved in all further planning. Lily had no objections. The group started back toward the cave with 2 new members, Thunder that rolls through sky and Moon that crests over cliff. They were filled in on details along the way, but Riverpaw remained quiet, trailing behind. When they reached the cave, the rest of the clan cats, Stoneteller, and the wolves were waiting. They had gone hunting, and the full group exchanged news as they ate. Stonepaw and Echopaw clamored for Riverpaw to share what had happened, but the she-cat was subdued. Something happened. I've got to go back to the Rushing Waters cave. Stonepaw looked troubled. Could we come along? Riverpaw shook her head. This is something I have to do alone. For the rest of the meal, the 3 were silent, listening to the others talk. Apparently Kite's condition was growing worse, despite Stoneteller's best efforts. Unfortunately, there wasn't much time to worry about the former alpha's condition. Most of the cats were eager to begin the operation. Ashhart, Riverpaw meowed as soon as Minnie had finished eating. I'm going back to the Rushing Waters cave. I need to talk to Cloud. The dappled Tom looked at the others, then seemed to come to a decision. He nodded. Very well, but we must go now and be back by sunfall. The 2 headed off. They bounded over the dark stones and edged across cliff paths. The journey passed like the blink of an eye, and they stood before the tribe's waterfall. Riverpaw drew in a breath. Wait here, please. Her mentor didn't question the plea. He watched as she ducked behind the waterfall.